Okay, so in the last video, we looked at imports. We looked at the situation when the world price of something is lower than our domestic price would be if we were separate. And therefore, the world producers are better at producing this thing than at least many of our domestic producers, not all, because we still have some domestic production here, and therefore we import. And this importing gives a big benefit to the people consuming that. Another thing to think of that I didn't mention, it also could give a big benefit if this is a component or an input for some final product. It could give a big input to companies who use that component in their production. But now we want to come back and look at the opposite situation. What if the world price for something is higher than our domestic market would be if we were left alone? And so I don't want to focus too much on the supply and demand part right now. So I'm just gonna do it that way. I mean, I'm just gonna keep everything the same and just focus on the world price being different. Okay, so the world price is quite a bit higher than our domestic price. So let's say this is the world price. Okay, this is our world price. So what's going to happen in this case? Well, we're going to have our producers are willing to supply a lot because they're like, oh wow, we love this high price for almonds. They're going to supply a lot, and so they're going to be willing to supply way out here, right? So they just look at the price. They're not worrying about who's buying them. And same thing as before, the consumers were not worrying about who's selling it. They're simply just looking at the price, and they're saying, okay, I can sell almonds on the world market for this much, right? So I'm only going to sell them to domestic consumers if they're willing to pay the same. Otherwise, I'll just sell all my almonds to the world market. So the price is going to rise for this good, right? It's going to go up to the world price. We're going to get a price rising. And then for the domestic consumers, they're going to buy a lot less almonds than they did before. They're going to say, well, I only want to buy this much because almonds are pretty expensive now because of the world market, driving up the price. So they're going to buy less almonds. And so this difference between the two, so when the quantity supply is bigger than the quantity demanded, this is going to be exports. Okay, so this is how much is going to be exported. So we're producing more than before, but locally we're consuming less than before, and we're exporting the difference. Okay, so basically when your world price is greater than your domestic price, you're going to export. That's the basic idea, and then we can decide, well, how does this affect the economy? What's this doing to the economy? And so we can go from there. So let's say the top part, let's start with the consumers. So again, they have this much benefit and it costs them this much benefit costs. So that's going to be our consumer surplus. It's much smaller than before. I kind of made it very tiny actually in my example. So that's our consumer surplus. So the consumer would not like this very much, although it's interesting. Whenever we hear about protectionism, we usually don't hear much about restricting exports, except for maybe key products. For example, like oil, or natural gas, there might be some restriction on exports, or there's sometimes restriction on exports for national security reasons, like to specific countries. But in general, most people are focused on this idea of imports hurting the economy, exports helping. That's really only from the point of view of the businesses who are directly competing with the international market. Consumers actually might have a different view if they understand the market. So this is exporting going on. So we're relatively good at producing this product of almonds, and that's true actually in the real world. We are relatively good at producing almonds, and so the U.S. mostly California, my home state, exports lots and lots of almonds. Okay, so now for the domestic producers, compared to when we were in autarky, they get way more producer surplus. It costs this much, and they get this large price. So this part right here, there's a gain that they wouldn't have gotten before this part. And so on, we can go on all the way over. And so all this is a gain. I just do it this way to kind of review the concept. This is all gain because they get a high price and they have a low marginal cost. So all the way up here is gain, 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 gain. All the way to here when they stop. Okay, so this is our producer surplus. And just to make sure it's clear. So our producer surplus is huge compared to before. And remember, before when we were in in autarky, which we can do at the very top, we just got the small triangle. So imagine that, because it was the same graph. So imagine instead of tires, it says almonds there. And so I just want to make, okay. And so it's the same graph. And so this part again, so our economic surplus is equal to consumer surplus plus the producer surplus is greater than autarky again. That's key. So even though the consumer surplus went down when we have exports, the producer surplus goes up a lot, right? And so it outweighs it. And this part right here is the gain to trade, right? And so this is greater than autarky by this triangle. That triangle just labels the section. Okay, just label the section. So that is, so again, we do have a gain for trade. We get more surplus overall, right? So, and if we have relatively free trade going on, right now we're assuming completely free trade, and we're making a few other assumptions too. So if we have free trade going on, we're getting gains on both sides. Okay, so we're getting gains for the consumers on everything imported. We're also getting gains for any company that uses imported components or imported materials, and we're getting gains for the producers on all the goods that we're really good at producing that we are exporting. So we're getting gains on both sides. The overall economy will be larger than if we were to be in complete autarky. We saw just a brief glimpse of some of this during the coronavirus, during the pandemic, when we saw a lot of international markets getting shut down or having trouble accessing goods from other places. It would be very hard for the US or most countries. It would be extremely hard for them to sort of replace all of their imports. And they would also have a lot of surplus capacity. So if we try to disconnect our economies from the rest of the world, for example, we'd also have tons of surplus capacity in areas that we export heavily, right? We would have all this extra production with nothing to do with it because our domestic market could not absorb it. So we would have extremely low prices for a while until we adjusted in the areas that we're good at exporting, and we'd have extremely high prices in the areas that we are currently importing. And it would be a very difficult adjustment process. But anyways, this is how to model this idea using the basic supply and demand graph that we learned, as well as the ideas of economic surplus. So I hope that's clear. So again, we're getting gains on both sides. Just the gains are going to a different side depending on if it's importing or exporting.